Rome, 241 BC. The waves of the Mediterranean crash against the shattered remnants of Carthage's once mighty fleet. Smoke rises from broken ships, their sails torn, their timbers aflame. On the horizon, Roman ships cut through the sea like predators. They are clumsy, heavy, built only recently, but victorious. For 23 long years, Rome and Carthage have fought in the bloodiest war the Mediterranean world had ever seen. A war of legions and mercenaries, of siege and starvation, of storms at sea and deserts on land. Tens of thousands are dead. Sicily lies in ruins. Carthage, the great maritime empire of the Western world, is broken. Rome, once just a land power of Italy, stands triumphant. But here's the question: how? How did Rome, a state with no naval tradition, no great fleet, no maritime experience, defeat Carthage, the greatest naval power of the ancient Mediterranean? How did a republic of farmers and foot soldiers overcome an empire of wealthy traders and seasoned sailors? And how did this war, the First Punic War, ignite a century-long struggle that would end with Hannibal, elephants crossing the Alps, and the eventual destruction of Carthage itself? This is the story of Rome versus Carthage, the war for Sicily, the First Punic War. Background: two rising powers. To understand the First Punic War, we need to step back to a time when two very different powers were rising on opposite sides of the Mediterranean. On one side, Rome. By the 3rd century BC, Rome was no longer just a small city-state on the Tiber River. Through decades of relentless war, the Romans had conquered the Italian peninsula. Their strength lay in their citizen army, the legions, ordinary farmers who, when called, picked up their swords and shields and marched to war. Rome's power was land-based, disciplined, stubborn. Their soldiers were not professionals, but their system of relentless recruitment and military training created an almost endless supply of manpower. But at sea, Rome was nothing. A landlocked power with only fishing boats, no real fleet. On the other side, Carthage. Founded centuries earlier by Phoenician settlers from Tyre, Carthage sat on the coast of modern-day Tunisia. It was the jewel of the Western Mediterranean. Carthage was rich, fabulously rich. Its empire was built not on legions, but on trade and sea power. Carthaginian merchants controlled trade routes from Spain to Africa, from Sardinia to Sicily. They harvested silver from Iberian mines, purple dye from the Levant, and grain from Africa. Their navy was unrivaled. Sleek, fast, deadly warships, the famous quinqueremes, crewed by professional sailors who had spent their entire lives at sea. But Carthage's weakness was on land. Unlike Rome, Carthage relied heavily on mercenaries, Iberian swordsmen, Numidian cavalry, Gallic warriors. They paid others to fight their wars. Rome and Carthage were very different powers. One commanded the land, the other ruled the sea. And between them, at the heart of the Mediterranean, lay the island of Sicily. Fertile, wealthy, and strategically located, Sicily was the prize. Whoever controlled Sicily controlled the trade routes of the central Mediterranean. For centuries, Sicily had been a patchwork of Greek colonies, local kingdoms, and Carthaginian outposts. It was a powder keg. And in 264, the spark was lit. The spark came from a city called Messana, modern Messina, on the northeastern tip of Sicily. The city had been seized by a group of rogue Italian mercenaries known as the Mamertines. They had originally been hired as soldiers, but then betrayed their employers, slaughtered the men, and took the city for themselves. Now, facing pressure from both Syracuse to the south and Carthage to the west, the Mamertines panicked. They needed help. And so, in desperation, they appealed to two powers, Carthage and Rome. For Carthage, Sicily was their backyard. They quickly sent a garrison to support the Mamertines. For Rome, the choice was more complicated. The Mamertines were pirates and brigands, hardly the kind of allies the Roman Senate wanted. But strategically, Rome could not allow Carthage to take full control of Messana. If Carthage dominated Sicily, Rome's southern flank would always be threatened. And so, reluctantly, Rome accepted. In 264 BC, Roman legions crossed the Strait of Messina into Sicily. It was the first time Roman armies had marched outside the Italian mainland. Carthage saw it as an act of war. The First Punic War had begun. The early struggles, 264 to 260 BC. Rome had no navy, no tradition of shipbuilding, no trained sailors. Carthage, meanwhile, had been ruling the waves for centuries. Their fleets patrolled the Mediterranean like sharks. Their sailors were seasoned professionals, their admirals experienced in the art of sea warfare. If Rome wanted to win, they had to do the impossible, build a navy from scratch. And so, in 260 BC, Rome captured a Carthaginian warship that had run aground. They studied it, copied it plank for plank, and used it as a blueprint. Within months, shipyards along the Tiber were buzzing. Thousands of trees were felled. Ropes and sails and iron fittings were gathered. In an astonishing feat, Rome built a fleet of more than 100 warships. But Rome knew they could never outsail Carthage's veterans, so they tried something different. They invented the corvus. The corvus was a boarding device, essentially a giant gangplank with a spike on the end. When a Roman ship closed in on an enemy vessel, the corvus would drop onto the deck, locking the two ships together. Then Roman legionaries would storm across and turn the naval battle into an infantry battle. It was a simple idea, but revolutionary. And in 260 BC, Rome put it to the test at the Battle of Mylae. 5. The Middle War, 260 to 249 BC. The fleets meet off the coast of Sicily. The Carthaginians are confident. Why wouldn't they be? They've ruled the seas for centuries. The Romans are landlubbers and clumsy new ships. Victory seems certain. But then something unexpected happens. As the Carthaginian ships sweep in, the Romans drop the corvus. Huge wooden bridges crash down onto enemy decks, the spikes digging into the planks. Roman legionaries, armored and disciplined, surge across. Suddenly, naval warfare becomes land warfare, and in that arena, Rome is unbeatable. The Battle of Mylae ends in a stunning Roman victory. Dozens of Carthaginian ships are captured, thousands of sailors killed or enslaved. Rome has announced itself as a new naval power. The Mediterranean is shocked. Carthage is humiliated, but the war is far from over. Rome pushes forward. Over the next few years, Rome keeps experimenting with its navy. Victories follow at Sulci, Tyndaris, and Cape Egnomus. Cape Egnomus in 256 BC becomes one of the largest naval battles in history. Nearly 700 ships clash, a sea of sails, oars, and iron rams. Imagine the noise, the thunder of drums, the crash of wood, the screams of men drowning. And once again, Rome emerges victorious. Flushed with success, Rome makes a bold move. They decide not just to fight in Sicily, but to strike at the heart of Carthage itself. Regulus in Africa. A Roman commander named Marcus Attilius Regulus sails across the sea and lands in North Africa. At first, his campaign goes brilliantly. Carthaginian forces are scattered, towns surrender, and for a moment it looks as though Rome might destroy Carthage itself. But then the tide turns. Carthage hires a Spartan mercenary general named Xanthippus. Trained in Greek warfare, Xanthippus reorganizes the Carthaginian army, bringing order to the mercenaries and discipline to the cavalry and elephants. At the Battle of Bagradas River in 255 BC, Regulus is crushed. Roman soldiers, unprepared for elephants and cavalry charges on the open plains, are slaughtered. Tens of thousands die. Regulus himself is captured. Legend says he was later tortured to death in Carthage, though Roman sources may have exaggerated. Still, the defeat is a harsh reminder. Rome is powerful, but Carthage is not finished. Back and forth struggle. For the next decade, the war drags on with no clear winner. Sicily becomes a wasteland. Cities are besieged, then starved, then besieged again. On land, Rome has the advantage. On sea, Carthage recovers, using its speed and seamanship to harass Roman fleets. And time and again, nature itself strikes against Rome. Storms sink entire fleets. At one point, nearly 200 Roman ships are lost in a single storm, drowning more than 100,000 men. Imagine the devastation. An entire generation of Roman citizens gone to the sea. Yet Rome refuses to give up. That stubborn resilience becomes their greatest weapon. By 249 BC, the war enters a new, desperate phase. 6. The war drags on, 249 to 242 BC. In 249 BC, Rome suffers one of its worst defeats at the Battle of Drepana. The Roman consul Publius Clodius Pulcher commands the fleet. Before the battle, he consults the sacred chickens, an old Roman ritual. If the chickens eat, it's a good omen, but the chickens refuse to eat. Frustrated, Pulcher throws them into the sea, declaring, "If they won't eat, let them drink." The gods, it seems, are not amused. The Roman fleet sails clumsily into Drepana's harbor, where the Carthaginians, under Admiral Adherbal, strike with precision. The Romans are trapped, outmaneuvered, and destroyed. Nearly 100 ships are lost. Rome's navy, once triumphant, is shattered. The Siege of Lilybaeum. Meanwhile, in Sicily, the war centers on the great Carthaginian stronghold of Lilybaeum. For years, the Romans try to take the city. Siege towers, battering rams, tunnels, nothing works. The Carthaginian defenders, supplied by daring blockade runners, hold out. The siege drags on endlessly, draining Rome's resources and morale. At the same time, Carthage sends mercenaries to harass Roman forces. Fierce Iberian and Gallic warriors cut down Roman patrols. The war becomes a grind, bloody, exhausting, seemingly endless. Rome near collapse. By the early 240s BC, both Rome and Carthage are exhausted. Carthage is broke, drained by the endless cost of mercenaries and ships. Their citizens grumble, their armies mutiny. Rome, meanwhile, is devastated by losses at sea. Entire fleets have been lost to storms and battles. Treasury reserves are empty. Citizens are weary of sending their sons to die in Sicily. It seems the war might end in stalemate. But Rome makes one last gamble. 7. The decisive end, 241 BC. In 242 BC, wealthy Roman citizens step forward. They pool their private fortunes to build one final fleet. Hundreds of new ships are constructed, lighter and faster than before. This fleet, commanded by Gaius Lutatius Catulus, sails to cut off Carthage's supply lines. On March 10, 241 BC, the two fleets meet near the Aegatis Islands off the western coast of Sicily. The Carthaginians, weighed down with supplies, are outmaneuvered. The Romans strike hard, their ships reinforced, their sailors disciplined. The Carthaginian fleet is crushed. Dozens of ships sink, thousands of sailors drown. The war is over. Carthage, bankrupt and broken, sues for peace. The peace terms. Rome dictates the terms. Carthage must leave Sicily entirely. They must pay a massive indemnity, 3,200 talents of silver, over 10 years. Rome takes control of Sicily, its first province outside Italy. For Carthage, it is humiliation. For Rome, it is triumph. 8. Aftermath and legacy. The First Punic War changes everything. Rome, once a landlocked power, is now a Mediterranean empire. Sicily becomes Rome's first overseas province, a stepping stone to future conquests. Carthage, humiliated and bankrupt, seethes with anger. In the years that follow, it nearly collapses in the Mercenary War, a brutal uprising of unpaid soldiers. Only the genius of Hamilcar Barca saves the state. Hamilcar raises his young son on tales of Roman treachery. That boy's name? Hannibal. The seeds of the Second Punic War, the War of Elephants, the War of Cannae, the War of Hannibal, are planted here in the ashes of the First. The First Punic War was more than just a clash for Sicily. It was a war of systems. Rome's citizen soldiers against Carthage's mercenary armies. Rome's stubborn resilience against Carthage's wealth and seamanship. Rome lost fleets to storms, armies to elephants, tens of thousands of lives to hunger and battle. But Rome never quit. And that, more than ships or swords, is why Rome won. Carthage was forced to bow, but they did not forget. The rivalry was only beginning, because Hannibal was coming.